And today, we're getting into a really intense and deeply necessary investigation. We're looking at the book, On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by the Yale historian Timothy Snyder.
Right, the same historian who wrote Bloodlands. And the urgency here is just, it's palpable. This isn't some dusty history lesson. Snyder's whole argument is that the catastrophic failures of democracies in 20th century Europe, the rise of fascism, Nazism, communism, they offer these direct, really sharp warnings for us today.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is, well, it's pretty profound. We need to absorb these 20 lessons from that history so that we can adapt the warnings and, actively prevent that subtle creeping slide into tyranny that you can see happening in real time around the world.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit. I think when we hear fascism or communism, we think of these purely ideological battles from the 1930s, but Snyder starts somewhere much more unsettling.
He does. He points out that both of these movements were really reactions to the same global forces we see today, globalization and the huge economic and social inequalities that it created.
So they were answers to a kind of chaos.
Exactly. The fascists, they just rejected objective truth entirely. It was all about the will of the leader, this glorious national myth. And they took all the world's complexity and just blamed it on a single conspiracy.
Putting a face on the problem.
Right. And the communists, they offered a different path. They said, a disciplined party elite who supposedly understands the laws of history will guide us to a perfect future. But both of them required the destruction of democracy.
And the really core, maybe the most uncomfortable takeaway right at the start is that Americans aren't inherently wiser or more virtuous than the Europeans who watch their own democracies just collapse.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Our only advantage is that we can learn from their very recent experience.
So we have to do that now while we still can. Let's get into the first set of warnings, which focus on personal action and defending our basic structures. Lesson 1. Do not obey in advance. This one, it sounds so simple, but Snyder says this is where almost all authoritarian power actually comes from.
It's maybe the most dangerous lesson because it's not about being forced to do something. It's about power that is granted freely. It's what he calls anticipatory obedience.
So people start trying to guess what the new regime wants.
Exactly. They think, how can I stay safe? How can I get ahead? And then they start voluntarily compromising their own values. They offer their services or information to the new power structure without ever being asked.
And when a citizen does that, they're basically sending a signal to the leadership.
A very clear signal. You're telling them that there are no limits, that they can move much, much faster. He points to the German elections in 1932 or the Czechoslovak ones in 1946. Because so many people just fell in line immediately, the new leaders realized they could speedrun a full regime change.
Let's dig into that Austrian example from March 1938, because it wasn't just about high-level politics.
No, not at all. When the Anschluss, the annexation happened, local Austrian Nazis immediately started grabbing Jews and forcing them to scrub the streets. But here's the crucial part. Other Austrians, people who were not Nazis, just stood by and watched. Some were amused.
They were passive participants.
Worse than that, when local Nazis started stealing Jewish property, other citizens who weren't party members just joined in on the theft.
So that collective action, or even just the tolerance of it, sent the message.
It sent the message to the very top, to people like Adolf Eichmann. It taught them what extreme measures the population would accept. If they'll watch their neighbors scrub streets, they'll accept property confiscation. And if they accept that, they'll accept deportation. The events in Vienna directly paved the way for Kristallnacht later that year.
Wow. And Snyder connects this whole idea to the famous Milgram experiment at Yale in 1961.
Right, and it's fascinating because Milgram was actually trying to prove that Germans had some unique authoritarian personality. He wanted to run the study in Germany.
But he couldn't get permission, so he did it in Connecticut.
And he found the complete opposite of what he was looking for. He had these ordinary people from New Haven come in, and an authority figure in a lab coat told them to deliver what they thought were electric shocks to a person in another room.
And most of them just did it, even when they heard cries of pain.
They kept going. And the shock for Milgram wasn't just the obedience. It was that it was universal. It wasn't some unique German flaw. It proved that people are startlingly willing to harm others if a new authority in a new setting tells them to.
So we can't just rely on our own goodness to protect us. It has to be an active choice.
It has to be a constant, conscious choice.
Which leads us right into lesson 2. Defend institutions.
Yeah, because institutions, courts, the media, unions, the rule of law, they don't have a life of their own. They can't protect themselves. Snyder is really clear on this. We shouldn't even say our institutions unless we are actively making them ours by defending them.
He brings up this devastating historical mistake made by German Jews in 1933. They just assumed Hitler would be held in check by the system.
A completely misplaced trust. They thought the German Constitution was robust. They thought there were crucial factors. They believed that, as a European power, Germany would sort of reflect on its better self.
It's the mistake reasonable people make. They assume that someone who came to power through the system won't then turn around and destroy that same system.
And tyrants have two main ways of doing that. The first is just instant destruction. That was the Bolshevik method. Just abolish everything immediately.
And the second is more subtle.
Much more. It's hollowing them out from the inside until they're just empty shells. They look the same, they have the same names, but they now serve the new regime instead of checking its power.
The Nazi term for that was Gleichschaltung. Right.
Right, which means coordination or bringing into line. It was this rapid synchronization of all public life to serve Nazi goals. Professional groups for doctors and lawyers were replaced by party-run bodies. Trade unions were banned.
So it's not just the government, it's the entire fabric of civil society.
The entire infrastructure. Within a year of Hitler becoming chancellor, Germany was a one-party state, and trusting those institutions to just self-correct was a fatal mistake.
And if those institutions are hollowed out, that takes us to lesson 3. Beware the one-party state.
The argument here is that you have to actively support a multi-party system and defend elections with everything you've got. Snyder quotes the abolitionist Wendell Phillips, who said, "The manna of popular liberty must be gathered each day or it is rotten."
Meaning the threat comes from within, from decay.
Exactly, and autocrats rarely seize power in one big move. It's usually a combination of an election win, some political spectacle, and then what are called salami tactics.
Just slicing off the opposition one by one.
Patiently, slowly, until only the ruling party is left. They use the machinery of democracy just long enough to destroy democracy itself.
Which makes voting so critical. There's a striking line in the book.
The voting is like making love. You never know when it's the last time. Germans who voted in 1932, or Czechs who voted in 1946, they thought they'd get another chance. For millions, that was the last free election of their lives.
So we have to act like any election could be the last one.
And Snyder connects this to two huge modern problems. The first is oligarchy, where money equals more voting power than a person.
And the second is when one party controls everything, especially if they don't have broad popular support.
Right, because a party like that has two choices. Live in constant fear of losing power, or actively work to weaken democracy so they can't lose. It becomes a political survival tactic.
So practically, what do we do?
Fix gerrymandering. Ensure one person, one vote. And critically, he highlights the need for paper ballots. They provide a physical record that can't be hacked and can always be recounted to build trust.
Okay, moving from structures to what we see every day. Lesson 4. Take responsibility for the face of the world.
This is all about symbols. Noticing signs of hate and resisting their normalization, symbols become reality. He says, don't look away, don't get used to them, remove them, and set an example.
He uses the Soviet propaganda during collectivization as an example. They depicted wealthy farmers, the kulaks, as pigs.
That dehumanization was a specific tool. It suggested that slaughter was an appropriate response. If your neighbor is just an animal, then taking their land and destroying them seems justified. It's how they enabled the horrific famines in Ukraine. The symbolic attack comes first.
And it was the same in Germany in 1933 when they started marking shops as Jewish.
A shop marked Jewish was a signal to everyone that it had no future. It normalized the idea that property rights could be defined by ethnicity. It turned envy and greed into a legal process of theft. Accepting those markings was already a deep compromise with a murderous future.
This all ties into Václav Havel's famous parable about the greengrocer.
Yes. From his essay, The Power of the Powerless, Havel describes a greengrocer in communist Czechoslovakia who puts a sign in his window that says, "Workers of the world, unite."
Well, he doesn't believe it.
Not at all. He's totally cynical. He just puts it there so the authorities won't bother him, so he can go about his life. It's a kind of tax you pay for a quiet life.
But when everyone does that,
the entire public space gets covered in these symbols of false loyalty. The system forces people to live within the lie. And by playing that game of appearances, they make the whole authoritarian structure possible. Resistance becomes unthinkable because it looks like everyone is on board.
So we have to refuse to play that game. Okay, shifting now from citizens to professionals inside the system. Lesson 5. Remember, professional ethics.
This is so critical. When leaders reject norms, professional commitments become the last line of defense. Authoritarianism can't function without complicit lawyers, judges, doctors, and civil servants.
Let's start with the lawyers.
Think about Hans Frank, Hitler's personal lawyer, who became the Governor General of occupied Poland. He just openly rationalized it all, saying that the law exists only to serve the race. So whatever the leadership said was good for the race, that was the law. Even worse, lawyers were vastly overrepresented as commanders of the Einsatzgruppen.
Let's clarify what those were.
They were the mobile killing squads that followed the German army into the Soviet Union. Their job was mass murder, mostly by shooting. The fact that highly educated lawyers were commanding these units shows you how completely professional ethics were just thrown out.
And it wasn't just lawyers.
Oh no. Doctors conducted hideous experiments in the camps. Businessmen used slave labor for profit. Civil servants meticulously recorded the whole process, making the system efficient.
So there's a kind of collective strength in professional ethics.
That's Snyder's point. If professionals had simply refused, if lawyers said no trial, no execution, if doctors said no consent, no surgery, the Nazi regime would have found it incredibly difficult to commit its worst atrocities. Just following orders doesn't apply when your specific professional code is on the line.
That sets the stage perfectly for the role of violence. Lesson 6. Be wary of paramilitaries.
A democracy has to have a monopoly on violence, and that violence has to be constrained by law. The moment armed groups outside of that official structure start using force, whether it's a party's armed wing or a leader's private security, democracy is in deep trouble.
This is the classic playbook from the 1930s.
The Nazi stormtroopers, the SA, and later the SS, they started as just party security, but they quickly created this atmosphere of fear that challenged the state's authority. The SS shows the whole progression. They start outside the law, then they act like they're above the law, and finally they undo the law by creating lawless zones, like the concentration camps.
And the book draws a direct line to the modern context, which is pretty striking.
It does. Snyder notes how historically unusual it is for a political leader to maintain a personal security force that uses violence against dissenters during a campaign. And encouraging mob violence, transforming the political atmosphere, it's all part of integrating violence into the political process itself.
The fear is that those groups eventually transform the official police and military.
Which brings us to lesson 7. Be reflective if you must be armed. This is aimed directly at police and soldiers.
The message is, if you carry a weapon for the public, you have to know that the great evils of the 20th century needed regular forces doing irregular things. The Holocaust, the Great Terror, they needed the manpower of regular police and soldiers.
Look at the scale. The Soviet Great Terror had over 680,000 executions in about a year. The NKVD's secret police pulled the triggers, but it relied entirely on help from local police and civil servants.
And with the Holocaust, it didn't start in the gas chambers.
That's a vital point. It started over shooting pits. And every large-scale shooting action involved the regular German police. In fact, regular policemen murdered more Jews than the dedicated Einsatzgruppen did. These were just ordinary men put in a new situation, given orders, and terrified of looking weak in front of their comrades.
Which points to this heartbreaking fact that conformity, not conviction, was the main driver.
Absolutely. The historical record is clear. Policemen who refused to kill were almost never punished. They just got transferred. People killed because they were afraid to stand out. Without that easy conformity, the atrocities would have been impossible on that scale.
Which makes Lesson 8 stand out a literal survival tactic.
Someone has to be first. It's so much easier to just follow along. But freedom requires that discomfort of saying or doing something different. But when you do, you can break the spell, and you'll find that others were just waiting for someone else to go first.
The book uses the example of Winston Churchill in May 1940. At that point, accommodating Hitler was the dominant view in Europe.
It was. France was falling, and everyone expected Churchill to make a deal. But he made the exceptional choice to keep fighting. That single decision forced Hitler to change his entire strategy, which led him to invade the Soviet Union.
Creating the two-front war that ultimately led to his defeat, what seems like the obvious choice to us now was, at the time, a radical act of standing out.
And you see this courage in smaller acts, too, like the story of Teresa Prekarowa in occupied Warsaw. At a time when it was natural to just retreat and protect your own family, She risked everything to sneak into the Warsaw Ghetto to bring supplies to Jewish families.
And she ended up saving a family from being sent to Treblinka.
She did, and when she was asked about it years later, she just called her own actions normal. But in a time of such horror, her choice to continue acting like a moral human being was the definition of exceptional courage.
Okay, let's shift from physical action to the battleground of the mind. Lesson 9. Be kind to our language.
The argument here is basically about cognitive resistance. You have to separate yourself from the hypnotic effect of the screen. Read books and use your own words, not just repeat the political cliches and slogans that are designed to empty language of all meaning.
The book mentions Viktor Klemperer, a scholar who tracked the language of the Third Reich.
Yeah, he noticed how Nazi language just eliminated the idea of legitimate opposition. Everything was a struggle, and any free thought was defamation of the leader.
And today, that's accelerated by our screens. The constant breaking news cycle prevents us from ever getting a sense of resolution.
It does. We're just hit with wave after wave of outrage, but we never see the whole ocean. We can't develop the concepts we need to actually understand what's happening if we're just mesmerized by the latest stimulus.
It's exactly what writers like Orwell and Bradbury warned us about.
Fahrenheit 451 was about screens dominating life. And 1984 was about newspeak, this deliberate shrinking of vocabulary to make critical thought impossible.
So the solution is to build what Snyder calls a mental armory.
And that requires reading literature. Any good novel, he argues, trains our ability to handle ambiguity, to judge complex intentions, and to feel empathy. He recommends everything from Dostoevsky to Harry Potter.
And that armory prepares you for the next fight. Lesson 10, believe in truth.
This is the line you cannot cross. The moment you give up on the difference between what you want to be true and what is actually true, you've submitted to tyranny. Snyder's line is chilling. Post-truth is pre-fascism.
Because if nothing is true, then power can't be criticized. There's no shared reality to base an argument on.
It's all just spectacle. And the person with the most money can buy the most blinding lights. Snyder lays out 4 ways that truth dies.
Let's go through them.
First is just open hostility to facts, presenting blatant lies as reality. Second is incantation, just endlessly repeating slogans and nicknames until they feel true.
Like, lock her up.
Exactly. The third is magical thinking, which is just openly embracing contradictions, promising to cut taxes for everyone while also eliminating the debt, for example. It forces people to abandon reason.
And the fourth.
Misplaced faith. This is the I alone can solve it claim. It turns politics into a religion where the leader's word is the only truth and evidence becomes irrelevant.
There's a great metaphor for this in Eugene Ionesco's play, Rhinoceros.
Yeah, Ionesco watched his friends become fascists in the 1930s, and he tried to capture how bizarre it was. In the play, people in a town start turning into rhinos one by one. To an outsider, it's insane. But to the people inside, it starts to seem normal, even desirable. It's a way to see the profound strangeness of post-truth behavior.
So to fight that, you have to do the work. Lesson 11, investigate.
You have to figure things out for yourself. Being a cynic is easy. It doesn't require any work. But your ability to actually find facts makes you an individual. And our shared trust in facts is what makes us a society.
Snyder brings up Hannah Arendt, who's writing about the lies around the Vietnam War.
Arendt felt, some comfort in the idea that reality would always win out. She said that even with the help of computers, you couldn't cover the immensity of factuality.
Yeah.
But Snyder points out that, well, that's no longer true. The internet can cover it.
It creates these echo chambers where you only see what you already believe. So what's the solution?
You have to pay for journalism, subscribe to print media, support real investigative work. It's like paying a plumber. You can't expect good results if you don't invest anything.
And the book makes a really good point about spectacle. When we consume news on a screen, we treat it like a reality show. The drama just has to keep escalating.
Exactly. And since we're all publishers now on social media, we have a personal responsibility for the public sense of truth. We have to be conscientious. You wouldn't drive recklessly and harm unseen people on the road. We have to learn not to do violence to the minds of unseen others online.
Okay, let's bring it back from the virtual world to the physical. Lesson 12, make eye contact and small talk.
This sounds so simple, but it's not just about being polite. It's about being a citizen, staying in touch with your social surroundings. It's how you break down the artificial barriers that ideology creates.
And the memoirs from the worst periods of the 20th century all mention this.
They do. A small smile, a handshake, just a moment of eye contact. It could take on this monumental, life-affirming meaning. When your neighbors start looking away when they cross the street to avoid you, that's when fear really grows.
Making small talk helps you map the psychological landscape of your world.
It lets you know who you can trust. As the book says, having old friends is the politics of last resort. But making new ones, that's the first step toward change.
And that social engagement leads right into lesson 13. Practice corporeal politics.
Power wants your body in a chair, your emotions spent on a screen. You have to get outside. Protest has to involve real bodies in real places with people you don't know. Otherwise, a tyrant feels no consequence.
And for a resistance movement to work, it has to cross social boundaries.
It has to unite people from different backgrounds who might disagree on other things. And they have to get out of their comfort zones and find themselves standing next to strangers.
If the only pushback is online, nothing changes.
Nothing. The book points to the Polish Solidarity movement in the 1980s as a key example. It succeeded because it brought together everyone, workers, intellectuals, people from the right and the left. They built this huge circle of trust.
So when the workers went on strike, lawyers and scholars joined them.
They did. And that massive coalition, even after it was suppressed by martial law, was so powerful that the communists eventually had to negotiate with them, which led to the end of communism in Poland.
But that public action depends on having some private security. Lesson 14. Establish a private life.
Tyrants are always looking for hooks to use against you. So clean up your computer, be careful with email, resolve any legal trouble. Your freedom depends on controlling what the state knows about you.
Hannah Arendt said that totalitarianism is basically the erasure of the line between private and public life.
That's right. And the violation of electronic privacy, like releasing stolen emails during a campaign, is designed to destroy our rights. If we don't have a secure space to think and plan, we can't act freely.
And when the media just chases those leaks as a story, they're part of the problem.
They're distracting everyone from the real event, which is the violation of privacy itself. Arendt said our public appetite for secrets is a political danger. When we consume private information as spectacle, we're helping to demolish our own political order.
So we can work on that individually and also collectively. Lesson 15. Contribute to good causes.
Yes, support civil society, political groups, charities, whatever. It's about knowing you're part of a network of people doing good.
Havel had that example of just taking pride in brewing good beer.
It's about any shared undertaking that builds trust outside your immediate family. All the major enemies of freedom in the 20th century were hostile to these kinds of independent groups. They wanted everything subordinated to the party state.
Okay, let's shift our gaze outward. Lesson 16. Learn from peers in other countries.
Snyder's point is that what's happening in the U.S. isn't unique. It's part of a global trend. We have to maintain international connections because no one country is going to solve this alone.
It's fascinating that he mentions how Eastern European journalists saw the 2016 election outcome more clearly than many Americans.
They'd seen it before. They recognized the patterns. To Ukrainians, for example, Americans seem so slow to react to cyber war and fake news because Russia had already used all those techniques on them first.
So history, which for a while seemed to be flowing from west to east toward democracy,
now seems to be flowing back from east to west. What happens there often happens here next. That's why having a passport is so important. It's not about surrender, it's about liberation. It lets you see how other nations are reacting to the same threats.
And that brings us to the language of manipulation. Lesson 17. Listen for dangerous words.
Be very, very wary of words like emergency, exception, extremism, and terrorism. These are the classic tools tyrants use to justify grabbing power.
He mentions the Nazi legal theorist Carl Schmitt.
Schmitt argued that the way to destroy all rules is to focus on the idea of the exception. You turn a crisis into a permanent state of emergency. That's how you trick people into trading their freedom for a feeling of fake safety.
And anyone who tells you that you have to trade liberty for security usually wants to take both.
Exactly. And the word extremism is basically meaningless. It's a word power uses to attack its critics. In authoritarian states like modern Russia, they use vague extremism laws to punish anyone outside the leader's current platform. So extremism comes to mean everything, except the thing that's actually extreme: tyranny itself.
This focus on terror leads into Lesson 18. Be calm when the unthinkable arrives.
Modern tyranny, he says, is terror management. When a terrorist attack happens, authoritarians exploit that event to consolidate power immediately. It's the oldest trick in the Hitlerian playbook.
The prime example being the Reichstag fire in 1933.
Whether the Nazis said it or not, Hitler seized the opportunity. The very next day, a decree was signed that suspended all basic rights for German citizens. That one event was used to justify a 12-year state of emergency that killed millions.
And modern authoritarians like Vladimir Putin have perfected this.
Putin's entire rise to power was based on managing terror events, the apartment bombings in 1999, the Moscow theater siege, the Beslan school attack. He used each one to grab more control, seize private media, and eliminate elections.
And this tactic has been exported.
Yes. Russia has used proxy terrorist forces in Ukraine. Their hackers have pretended to be ISIS to disrupt French politics. They fabricated a rape story in Germany to sow chaos and anti-immigrant sentiment.
The lesson of the Reichstag fire for tyrants is that one moment of shock can buy you an eternity of submission.
So for us, the key is vigilance. Our natural fear and grief can't be allowed to destroy our institutions. James Madison warned that tyranny always arises on some favorable emergency. We have to recognize it and resist it right away.
Okay, from terror, let's move to identity. Lesson 19, be a patriot.
This is a really crucial distinction between patriotism and nationalism. A patriot, Snyder says, serves their country by striving for its ideals.
Let's list what he defines as unpatriotic first.
It's unpatriotic to dodge a draft, to mock war heroes, to admire foreign dictators, or to solicit foreign election help. It's undermining the nation for personal gain.
So let's break down that patriot versus nationalist divide.
A nationalist tells you that your country is the best no matter what it does. They're not interested in the real world, only in resentment. A nationalist says, it can't happen here, which is the first step toward disaster.
And a patriot.
A patriot wants the nation to live up to its highest ideals. They demand that we be our best selves. They're concerned with the real world and believe in universal values. A patriot says, it could happen here, but we will stop it. One is constructive and demands responsibility. The other is destructive and demands blind loyalty.
And that leads us to the final culminating lesson. Lesson 20, be as courageous as you can.
To find that courage, we first have to fix our sense of time. We have to reject two big political traps: the politics of inevitability and the politics of eternity.
The politics of inevitability was that myth after 1989 that history was just automatically moving toward liberal democracy, the end of history.
It put us into a kind of intellectual coma. It lowered our defenses and made us think history didn't matter anymore.
But when that myth shatters, we become vulnerable to the second trap, the politics of eternity.
And this is where we look back to a mythic, disastrous past and define all of politics as a permanent crisis, a permanent state of national victimhood. Every story is about an enemy attacking the pure nation.
This is the world the eternity politicians want to live in, the 1930s, forever.
Right. And by focusing on that mythic past, they prevent us from thinking about any possible future. Planning for the future seems impossible, even disloyal, when you're in a permanent state of emergency. The great danger is moving from the coma of inevitability into the hypnosis of eternity.
So what's the way out of those two traps?
History. History is the only thing that stands between them. It lets us see patterns, recognize old tricks, and make responsible judgments. It allows us to be responsible, not for everything, but for something. It gives us the company of people who have resisted before us, who have done and suffered more than we have.
That's the key. We can't rely on history to save us, but we have to use it as a tool for judgment. He ends with Hamlet's realization that time is out of joint. Oh, cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right.
But Hamlet doesn't end in despair. He ends with a call to action. Nay, come, let's go together.
So this deep dive into On Tyranny is, it's sobering, but it's also incredibly empowering. These 20 lessons are a blueprint for individual responsibility and collective action right now.
It's not just a history book. It's an alarm bell and a toolkit. We have to use this knowledge to escape those twin traps of being passive on one hand and just cynical on the other, moving from just understanding to actually resisting and defending democratic norms. That's the whole point.
History shows us the dark possibilities, for sure, but it also gives us the company and the examples of those who resisted when things were at their worst. So with the knowledge that this isn't an end, but a beginning, the question is, what will you do with that responsibility?
Something to reflect on and hopefully to act on. Thanks for joining us for this essential deep dive. We really encourage you to continue your own investigations here.
We'll see you next time.